So I want to thank everybody for joining us for the Siemens webinar series. I think you're going to get a chance to kind of experience a new, little different format of webinar we're trying here. So in this time, we're actually going to do a little bit more of like a case study format. I think traditionally you guys are used to, we do a lot of, operation and programming topics, and in the past maybe we've done a few service topics and whatnot, but tend to be more on our HMI and kind of like a very Cinemark centric type of presentation. So when Lars came to me and wanted to do his next webinar, and he said, I got an idea. I want to compare 3-axis technology. I said, hey, this sounds pretty cool. So just hold tight and get ready for it. It's going to be a little different format. We're certainly going to have a lot more dialogue, but I think it should be fun and definitely informative for everybody. So before I totally let it over to Lars, let me introduce myself. For those of you that may not already know me, my name is Chris Pollock. I am the Virtual Technical Application Center Manager. Big, long title. Basically, it means that I develop a lot of the online content that you see from Siemens, from Cinemark, specifically on operation and programming topics, but there's a lot of the stuff centric to the Cinemark control. So I am certainly a resource available for you guys. This is my contact information. If you ever need any help, please feel free to reach out. Probably email is the best, but if you're in a bind, you can certainly always try to call me. Coming up, just to plug a few things we do have coming up, our next webinar that's going to be on the 24th of June is going to be presented by Daniel Vitullo. You guys know Daniel from some past segments he's done, but this time he's going to dig into the world of ISO compatible mode. And you may or may not know what we mean by ISO compatible mode, so we'll give you a little teaser. Imagine being able to pull in a program that was written for a FANUC or a Mitsubishi, or basically any control that is complying with the ISO standards. You can actually run that type of program in the Cinemark control. So if this is something that you're interested in, certainly swing back and check that one out. And then in August, Steve Holmes is going to be a guest presenter with me, and he's going to dig into some service and maintenance topics on the Cinemark. So we've done a little bit of service stuff early on, haven't done a lot of it, so it's a great opportunity to let Steve kind of dig into some new topic areas for us. Additionally, I want to make sure that those of you that are maybe joining us that are new to this format, you know where to go to get some great information. So first and foremost, I would say always go to our CNC for You website. So the web address is there on the top of your screen. We have all things centric to Cinemark, and certainly from the perspective of the user. You want to go there. You can see our webinars, upcoming webinars. Certainly we have all of our past webinars that are recorded there and you can access there. We have a bunch of training classes you can get to there. Yes, unfortunately, currently right now with our current COVID scenario, our training classes have been temporarily suspended, but we are looking to start offering them again, hopefully even as soon as maybe August. So keep an eye out there. And as well, if you just want to see kind of all things Siemens as far as some of the VTAC stuff that we've created, when you're there, go to the training, go to the virtual training tab and download our content manager. This is a real helpful document. Basically what happens is everything we put online, whether it be on our CNC View website or on our YouTube channel, the links are all embedded in this document. You can use this to kind of drive down through, and it'll actually make recommendations on videos you should watch based on you just pulling down those top pull down selections. So download it, it's free of charge and gives you access to all of our material. And we update this on a regular basis. So I would say if you find it helpful, come back, download it again, and then, make it periodically. I try to get it updated maybe once a quarter. So it's a good resource for you. Additionally, as I mentioned, we have the training classes, so you can see the training class list. Obviously, this is a little dynamic right now, but if you do want to come in and join us for the training, you can take advantage of that there. And if you also don't know of it, we have a YouTube channel, which we refer to as Mr. CNC. Certainly, we put up all of the recordings from the webinars, like you're here hanging out with me today doing. But additionally, we have a lot of other video content that you won't find anywhere else. We do a YouTube live series. We try to do them about once a month. Those are all recorded and captured on the YouTube channel, so you can attend them live, but if you don't make it live, go check out the past ones. And we do a lot of how-to videos, promotional videos. So certainly check it out. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lars Fowler. A lot of you might already know Lars from having hosted some past webinars. So let's all say hello to Lars. Hello, Lars.
Hey, Chris, how's it going?
It's going very well, thank you. So Lars is a member of my team here. He covers the East Coast, interfacing with all kinds of machine tool dealers and importers and OEMs. And he's really does a lot of customer facing roles. Has a high technical ability within the center control. And today he's going to help us explore this world of 3-axis versus 5-axis. So without further ado, let us switch over to you, Lars. So give me 1 second here to stop my share, and we can give you presenter rights. This is always the fun part. All right, so it's flipping now, and you should have it.
Okay, let me just make sure I get the right screen up here.
No problem.
All right, how are we looking?
I see your title slide, our case study between 3 and 5-axis.
Perfect.
So we're good.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris, and to everyone who has joined. Welcome to this webinar presentation. This, as Chris mentioned, is going to be kind of unique. We wanted to venture out and explore some different topics out there, which we hope you find to be very applicable and at the very least somewhat interesting for you. So as you can see on the screen, today we'll be discussing an independent case study between 3 and 5-axis. And notice how I'm saying 5-axis in parentheses 3 plus 2. So we will be comparing fixed axis machining. So we're not actually getting into synchronized 5-axis, we're getting into 3 plus 2 machining. With all the current buzzwords in our industry, right? Case study isn't one you typically hear a whole lot about. The one that probably comes the closest, in my mind anyway, would be like a time study. So I'm very familiar with time studies. In a previous life, I worked as a service and applications engineer for a pretty small machine tool dealer. And being the only guy staffed there, the only technical guy staffed there, I got those time study requests quite frequently. And trust me when I tell you, a time study is pretty much a required component of the sales process nowadays for machine tools. And one of the things that always kind of struck me is how one-sided these time studies are, right? So you're really only taking into consideration what your machine tool technology is capable of. And one very important factor in that equation, which is always missing, is what would your competition's time study look like? Or more importantly, what would a time study with a different, less costly capital equipment investment look like? And that's pretty much what we set out to answer today. So in essence, the question we're attempting to answer today is whether or not 5-axis technology is quote unquote worth it, right? So I'm going to say stay tuned because I promise you there's an answer and the supporting information is going to be quite interesting for you. So for argument's sake here, let's all welcome Jeff, right? We see our guy here in a suit. So Jeff's a C-level executive at a local, well-established little job shop. So we can assume the company's doing pretty great for the last decade or so, but they're starting to feel the impact of their competition investing in some major capital equipment. So through years of networking, Jeff has an in with a brand new startup company, and they're looking to shake up the world with their new product offerings. So in conversation, Jeff learns that this company has not yet decided on a primary supplier and smells opportunity. So there's some issues to be worked out though. For one, Jeff's team is already working nonstop around the clock, and they actually recently added the first shift to the Saturday operation. So for all intents and purposes, he's tapped for available machine space. So that gets him thinking. He starts to ponder, what kind of technology would we need to invest in to take advantage of this incredible opportunity? So do I need this fancy new 5-axis technology I see all over YouTube and social media? Or can I just get away with picking up a couple of 3-axis machines, which my manufacturing team is already very familiar with already? So what do you think, Chris? Do you think 5-axis technology is worth it?
Well, I guess my first question would be, what kind of volume of parts is Jeff manufacturing? Is this low volume, like job shop piecework, or is this high volume production?
I would say Jeff's company is they're pretty familiar with, I would say low to medium. So anything up to maybe 120 parts per run.
So if I was a guessing man, I would say 3-axis is going to be more cost effective than 5-axis, at least in that
Okay.
piece part work would be my guess.
Okay.
I'm
Interesting.
assuming you're going to maybe show me wrong. I don't know.
Well, let's see. Like I said before, the supporting information and the answer is definitely quite interesting. So let's talk about some accepted industry norms, right? So on the left side of the screen here, we can see a very basic, almost boring looking 3-axis part, right? It's a simple sprocket. So we can probably imagine the work holding situation for this first operation is going to include fixturing in a simple vise. We're going to machine the top flat, maybe center drill the hole and then drill completely through. Then the second operation will probably have the part mounted on the fixture, bite a through hole, and a 3-axis tool path would walk around the outer perimeter and just machine the outside part of the sprocket, and voila, there's your part, right? A typical 3-axis quote unquote boring part. Now, if we take a look on the right side of the screen, right, there is what we can probably easily argue there's a true 5-axis part, right? It's shiny. It's machined to the tightest tolerances because it's a medical implant after all. It's machined out of some fancy forged piece of material. Here we see some incredible shapes that were probably produced with very intricate step overs, and we see some freeform shapes here. Simply put, this is a piece of art, right? And as a matter of fact, speaking of art, here's a third piece that we frequently see in our industry. So here's a demonstration piece, which was given to me by one of my customers, I think about 2 years ago. And this happened while I was attending one of their open house events. So what you're looking at here is a picture, and I actually have this in my living room. So that's a picture of a flower that's machined out of aluminum on a 5-axis machine, utilizing simultaneous 5-axis machining. So if you take a look at these 3 parts, I think we can all agree, the part on the left, it's not that interesting. The part on the right, the knee implant, that's pretty interesting. But I think we can all agree that the middle part here kind of takes the cake. Is it a practical part? Not really, but it looks cool. So it definitely has that wow effect. But what's the actual takeaway here? Now, what I want to point out is that even the typical 3-axis part on the left side of your screen could very feasibly be manufactured on a 5-axis machining center in a really profitable way.
Good point.
So let's get back to Jeff here. Is 5-axis technology really worth it? So after setting up the study, running the numbers, running them again, adjusting the spreadsheet, and running the numbers again and again and again, we can say with great certainty, yes, Jeff, it's absolutely worth it, even in a low volume production run. So Chris, I think that kind of answers your or speaks to your perspective. Yes, even in a low volume production run, 5-axis is worth it.
Interesting. So now you kind of got my attention. So you think that something less than 150 pieces, we can show that a 5-axis machine, which is probably significantly more money to purchase,
Right.
is going to be more cost effective. Okay, I'm in. Let's
Cool.
check it out.
Awesome. So let's dig into the processes and the numbers, and let's see if we can convince either Jeff or you, Chris, that this is really a possibility. And maybe we can convince Jeff to actually take his company to the next level too. So let's dive right in. Enter the independent case study. So what makes this an independent study, you might ask? So one of the things that's very important here, and we want to kind of keep that in the back of our heads throughout this entire presentation, we are strictly going to compare 3 and 5-axis technology. So this is not going to be a brand specific, machine brand specific, or even a control specific analysis. So in essence, the performance of the 3-axis will be completely equal to the performance of the 5-axis, if that makes sense. So again, we'll be comparing a 3-axis vertical milling machine and a 5-axis AC kinematic machine. So those are both very common machines in the industry. You see them in shops all over the world. And also we'll be comparing apples to apples. So we're looking at a single fixture versus a single fixture setup scenario. Going back to the performance aspect, we will be focusing on constant chip load between the two scenarios. There's a few assumptions that we can certainly make. For example, we can make the assumption that a 5-axis machine typically has a higher, has a more powerful spindle. The machines that we looked at for this case study, for the 3-axis verticals, they typically top out about 8,000 RPM at the max range. Now, there are some discrepancies here, certainly, but we had to pick a range and stick with it. Now, when we took a look at the comparable 5-axis models, the 3+2 machines, we've found that they typically top out at about 16,000 RPMs. Another thing that we can assume safely is that the 5-axis machine is typically going to have a larger tool magazine capacity, but those two factors, the RPM max spindle and the tool magazine capacity, they were not included in this case study. One thing we can with great certainty say, the 5-axis, and I think everybody on this call is going to agree, 5-axis machine is going to have a larger price tag than a 3-axis machine. So that being said, because the price tag is different, we can also assume that the burden rate for a 5-axis facility will be higher than that of a 3-axis facility. Make sense?
Yeah, but what do you mean by burden rate?
That's a good question. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with the term burden rate. There's certainly different ways to interpret it. We decided to come up with our own definition for this case study, and I think it's very applicable. So let's take it here. So for today, we're going to define the burden rate of a manufacturing facility simply as the internal cost to produce a part plus profit, right? So we have to remain profitable, or else we don't have stuff to cover our internal cost, and profit on top. Simple.
Hey, Lars, your audio's breaking up. Hey, Lars, do I got you?
Going to be cutouts in here, and just with me. Yeah, can you hear me?
You're having, yeah, your audio was cutting in and out quite a bit. I don't know if you were getting some internet lag.
Let me take a look.
Now you sound a lot better all of a sudden. That was weird.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
it could have just been a little bobble. So just back up a little bit. We got the part where you first introduced burden rate as internal cost plus profit, but we didn't really hear anything beyond that.
Okay, so again, for the purpose of this discussion today, so we're going to say that the definition of the burden rate of a manufacturing facility is simply going to be the internal cost to produce said part plus a profit. So enter our simplified burden rate calculation sheet over here. So I promise you guys, this is not going to be a PowerPoint heavy presentation, but there is going to be some Excel spreadsheet cutouts in here. I can tell you there was a lot of calculations going on in the background. There's a lot of there was a lot of number crunching in order to get the result that we're about to explore. So what we see here in our simplified burden rate calculation sheet is we have a column for the 3-axis milling machine and a column for the 5-axis milling machine. So since we're keeping as many factors constant as possible, the two variables we have to work with are the machine cost and the labor cost. So essentially what we have here, the estimated machine price that we're going with for a 3-axis milling machine is $125,000. The starting price for the 5-axis milling machine will be $260,000. So let's say that we were to finance these machines over 60 months with no interest. We would end up with a monthly payment of $2,083.33 for the 3-axis milling machine, compared to $4,333.33 for the 5-axis milling machine. So automatically, just due to the base cost of the machine, we're going to have a significant difference that we have to make up somehow over the course of this 1 month. Adding to that, we have to take into account the labor cost. So we can reasonably assume that the hourly wage a machine operator that's operating a 3-axis milling machine nowadays can be more or less be summed up to $20 an hour. Whereas a 5-axis milling machine operator is probably going to be in the range of $26 an hour. So if we take this and we spread this out over the course of a month, we end up with $3,200 for the 3-axis milling machine operator versus $4,160 for the 5-axis milling machine operator. So that gives us a monthly increase between these two machines, or a delta of $3,200 and $10. Now, if we break this down per hour, and typically a burden rate is calculated per hour, so that's the reason for doing this, we end up with $20.06 per hour of a difference. So for simplicity's sake, we're going to round this to $20. And with an expected burden rate for a 3-axis milling machine facility of $120 an hour, that brings us to $140 per hour for a 5-axis milling machine facility. So is that clear, Chris? Does that make sense?
So let me just work it through real quick, because I'm sure a lot of people on the call kind of thinking the same thing. So 120 bucks an hour. So that's assuming that shop's been doing business, and at $120 an hour, they have some form of profitability. We're not certainly saying how profitable they are. They could have an extra $1 at the end of the month or an extra $1,000, but they're keeping the doors open at $120 an hour.
Absolutely.
So all you're really saying is just, if that is a true statement, and that number could be 150, it could be 200, that's irrelevant here. But if they're profitable at 120, for them to at least maintain the exact same profitability, they do have to increase their shop rate now to $140, hence your $20 an hour calculation based on the increased cost of the machine and the increased labor cost.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I think we're there, or at least I'm there. And if you're not there, shoot a message in the chat and we can dig into it further, but I'm following you so far.
Okay, awesome, cool. So now we got the burden rate kind of covered, and we'll come back to, trust me, we'll come back a few times to that. So moving on. Now let's go back to Jeff's story for a second here. Now, Jeff is obviously very interested in doing something, right? He's just trying to figure out, does it make sense for me to invest in 3-axis machines because I'm out of machine capacity, or do I take the step to the 5-axis machine? So here is our discussion piece, right? The part is very unique, no, but it gets the point across, I believe. So what we have here is just a quick overview of this part. Now it's a 4-station pneumatic manifold. It's going to be machined out of aluminum, 6061, and we're assuming that the material size is going to be fairly accurate and fairly close to the final machined piece. Now, the important thing is that for discussion purposes, we can assume that this is a typical part which would be run in a business like Jeff's, right? And also, it's probably worth mentioning that for the sake of the case study, this part was intentionally designed with 6 sides to be completely machined, right? So it's a 6-sided part. It's going to require a certain amount of operations, certainly more than just one operation, even on the 5-axis machine. Okay. So without further ado, let's start to take a look at our technologies that we're comparing. Here's our 5-axis machining center. So here's a couple quick specs. This is a very typical design for a trunnion style machine. So essentially what we have here is our spindle is going to move up and down in the Z-axis. We have our X-axis, our Y-axis, and then our trunnion will be our swivel A-axis, and on top of our trunnion we have a rotary C-axis with our part fixture. So a couple things here. We are omitting the number of tool stations. So this machine is going to give us 20 pockets for the tool holding capacity. And the spindle taper, while this machine can typically be offered in Cat 40 and HSK 63 or the larger variants, we're going to stick with Cat 40 just to minimize the discrepancy between this machine and our 3-axis vertical machining center. Okay, moving on.
And to reiterate, the 260, obviously that's on a 3+2 machine.
This is a 3+2
which is
machine,
certainly achievable in the market space. If it was full 5-axis, that would be a different story, but we're not even trying to apply full 5-axis here.
Exactly right. That might come at a later time if time permits, right?
Fair enough.
Okay. So moving on to the process flow. So here's a couple of noteworthy items, right? So for the work holding, obviously we're proposing kind of a Raptor, 5-axis vise scenario. We have two sets of jaw inserts here. We have some dovetail inserts and flat inserts that you can see. And also this very attractive looking hunk of 2-inch riser that I had to design on the fly just because I needed some extra clearances. This one is unbranded as of now, but that's kind of what we're looking at for the fixturing situation on the 5-axis machine. Now, for the tooling proposal, this is kind of where it gets nice because we're just using standard tooling. We're using end mills, we're using drills, twist drills, and we're using taps, and that's it. For our tool holder, again, we're basically just using Cat 40 style collet chucks.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
Right, I would say so. So just bear with me while I switch my screen. Make sure I don't lose you guys. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we got you. Looks good.
Okay, so here we are. This is our machine, right? Floating in space, like every machine should look like. Also very clean too. So again, here we have our spindle, our rotor axes, we have our swivel axes, our here's our fixture, and certainly we have our wrap device, our beautiful 2-inch riser block, and our dovetail inserts. Now, is this motion relatively smooth, Chris, or is it chunky? Is it clunky?
It's a little jerky, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. It looks fine.
Okay. So just so you guys can take a look, here is the part that's simulated, the final piece, completely machine simulated. That's going to be sitting in here like this, obviously. Oh, here we go. My 3D mouse has been playing with me. It's Friday, I think. Of course, this will make a little bit more sense here. Now you can actually take a look at the raw stock and the final part inside of the raw stock. Here we go again, 2 for 2. So if you take a look here at our operations, so it's very possible a lot of you guys are not familiar with the software. This is Siemens NX for manufacturing. Just so you guys know what you're looking at here. On the left side here is where I have my workpiece defined and my work offsets. So obviously this being a 5-axis capable machine, we're able to machine more than one side in one operation. So the way I have it laid out is I certainly have a top-facing operations on the top, such as facing, spot drilling, etc. And then I have different rotationals set up that basically walk around the part, allowing me to machine 5 sides without having to have an operator go in there and physically touch or readjust this part. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and see if we can simulate this without too much stuttering. One thing to note here, it's very important. In order, again, to make this as clear and concise as possible and not introduce other factors, other varying factors, what we're simulating here is purely based on tool path, okay? So it's not based on some post-processor because we don't want to introduce the possibility of having a more advanced post-processor from one machine to another machine type, etc. So this is purely based on toolpath. And up here, and if you see my mouse, you can see another little status. Here's a little time. And what I'm going to show you afterwards is how I extrapolated all those times and plugged them into the beautiful quotation worksheet. All right, so without further ado, let's go. Let's take a look here. So here we see some facing operations. So we're facing the top. I apologize if it looks a little clunky.
It looks good. I wouldn't worry about it. So obviously you're doing this in CAM. This way we can just keep everything consistent, right? So there's no comparison of shop mill versus G code or conversational. So the 3-axis, we're going to do the same scenario, right? We're going to program it. Yeah. So just the advantages or disadvantages of a 3-axis versus a 5.
Now, I think down the road, it might be interesting to do some comparisons between systems, but it's all if time permits, right?
For sure.
So one of the things here that you see is you certainly see some funky things with simulation. That's always going to be the case. Certainly here where I'm drilling with the 1/4-inch holes, simulating that pack in a real life scenario would look different. And one thing to mention too is, right, and for those guys, for those of you on the call here who have programmed before on a CAM system, um, you would probably agree that you can spend an endless amount of time optimizing a program. So one of the things that I did here was I really kind of set out and said, okay, let me just invest a reasonable amount of time programming this. Chances are I'm not going to be ever cutting this part in real life. Now that could change, I don't know. But I just wanted to basically get some realistic looking toolpath out there. Yes, there's feed rates that could be adjusted and optimized. There's rapids that could be optimized. But the idea was to get a process down and then compare it verbatim on a 3-axis machine, just so we can start to get an idea.
And since you're using the same chip removal rate in both applications, none of those variables come into play. So we
Exactly.
have as close to an apples to apples comparison as we could get.
Exactly right.
Perfect.
So that's the whole idea. Now, certainly, if I was machining this part right now and I wasn't machining a block of wax, I probably would change my parameters for this deep hole drilling operation, right, Chris?
Mm.
But, you know, there is some, again, we will be, oh, that's a hiccup. And there's certainly, but
Oh,
I think for the case
well,
study, it will hold true.
let me ask you one question. So
Sure.
obviously in the 5-axis, we have a lot less tool changes just because I can get to all the sides. Did you take into account the savings on tool changes for this scenario, or we kind of watched that?
No, for this scenario, we kind of washed it. Again, if you get into the tool change scenario, especially in the machine tooling, I would say a lot of machine tool sales are being lost and won based on the tool change time capable time of this machine. So for this scenario, we kind of just washed it out and said, you know what, if we're not going to be using varying speeds and feeds between these two technologies, then certainly it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to include the tool change time for this setup here.
So if we added it back, all that would do would be make the performance of the 5-axis even a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Okay. So here's our part. Let me see if I can rotate this without making too many ridiculous jumps. So you can see, we were able to completely machine 5 sides. I hope nobody's getting seasick here. But yeah, we were able to completely machine 5 sides of this part. Now, I mentioned before, this part was intentionally designed with 6 sides. So that kind of just tells the storyline that this part, in all reality, only requires 2 setups in a 5-axis situation. So let's take a look at our results. I'm going to switch back, so just bear with me here. Okay, so this is not too heavy in the Excel world yet, so stay with me here. So this is these are some screenshots from our quotation worksheet here. So a couple of things that I want to point out. Certainly we are, all these cells are very dynamic in the real Excel spreadsheet, that is. So what I have here for this study, we have decided to just use a part quantity of 50, right? So I'm specifying my part quantity of 50 here. I'm also specifying my fixture quantity. In this case, the 5-axis will only have 1 fixture. I specify my material, the dollar amount per part. So that's the sourcing cost. Up here, we take a look at our shop rate per minute. Now, previously I mentioned burden rate is typically given based per hour, but because the cycle time and programming time, we generally work in minutes, I wanted to convert that. So we have our shop rate here in minutes. Now burden rate per hour, this one here matches 140 if you think back to the previous slide. So moving on, we have a cost per part of $3.25 times 50 parts. It gives us a total of $162.50. So moving right along, what you guys just was machining side A, so operation 1. So here's our cycle time, and I have it broken down based by tool, based by orientation, and here's the cycle time. So at a cycle time of 15.86 minutes, that gives us a total cost of $1,850.33. The programming time here, we gave us 250 minutes. So 250 minutes times our shop rate gives us a total of $583.33. Now, for the fixturing, we are saying that we're using generic fixturing, fixturing that was already pre-existing. Again, we want to limit the amount of variables in this case study, so we just zeroed that out for both cases. Right? Now, for a setup time here, that includes things like mounting device, building our tools, setting our offsets, making sure everything is square. So here we have a operation time of 30 minutes. And then for the pod lowering time, we actually have a time of 2 minutes. So if we continue down and we take a look at our operation 2 methodized, we come out to a total cost for this part of $3,400.31 and $31.50. So if we divide this by our part quantity of 50, it gives us a total price per part of $68.63. So, Chris, is that overkill? How is that looking?
No, I think that makes sense. I think the only thing I would question, but I'm expecting, I think I know your answer. The programming in CAM, did we just kind of say, hey, it's going to be the same amount of programming time on the 3-axis or the 5, so that doesn't add a variable in here?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's an apples to apples scenario too. It's not like we're
It
saying
is.
it takes
Right.
you more time or takes you less time programming a 5-axis machine versus a 3. Okay.
Exactly. And if you think about it too, if you take a look at our operation 1 and think back to how I explained that operation 1 covers 5 sites. So if you take the total programming time for 5 sites and you divide it by 5 to get the operation, the programming time for a single side, gives you 15 minutes. So it does fall in line. It's
Okay.
reasonable. Again, there's going to be instances where some people are faster, better programmers, faster, more efficient programmers than others. But again, we're trying to limit the amount of variables here.
Right, because that's not what we're debating. We're
Exactly.
debating, is a 3-axis machine more proficient than a 5 as far as profitability? Okay.
Exactly. Cool. All right. So moving on. So we've seen the single clamping scenario for the 5-axis machining center. So let's take a look at the 3-axis equivalent here. Okay. So here is our 3-axis machining center. It's just a very basic vertical machining center with a 40 by 20 inch table. Very common, a very typical design also. Again, we want to note here that we're omitting the tool holding capacity, and we have standardized in CAD 40 for the study today anyway, so that takes care of that. Now, take a look at this. The average starting price tag is $125,000. So it is significantly less than a 5-axis machine. Keep that in mind. All right. So 1 second here. Let me switch back to my NX. Okay. All right. So here's our 3-axis vertical machining center. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is a typical Kurt style vise, very common in the industry. This is one of those items I feel like every shop has laying around, at least somewhere. Here again, we can take a look at our completed part. So it's a different orientation, but it's starting with the same side facing up. And here's our part inside of our raw stock. And just so you can get an idea here. So without further ado, let's take a look. You'll see here, if you remember from my previous screen sharing, that actually I can just switch over here. We have a lot more operations. So this would be the top operation. This would be the operation facing in the Y minus direction. This would be facing in the X minus direction and just walking around the part this way. So since we are limited with a 3-axis vertical milling machine, just because of the way it's set up and the kinematic it is, we only have one operation for this, and we would have to have another separate operation. And yeah, so let's take a look what this looks like. Again, we're simulating the machine in the exact same manner. So we're just basing this on toolpath, right? Same simulation speed. We'll have a little counter here for the time. So let's take a look.
Same machine rapid rate, all that stuff.
Same, exactly. Yep.
Constant. Okay, good.
Yep. So as a matter of fact, all of these speeds and feeds were copied from one machine to the next machine, so they're all exactly the same. They're identical.
So then it stands to reason, certainly, if I then take advantage of the performance of the 5-axis, then that can add to the numbers.
Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So here we
So
see
man,
that
everything you're doing, it seems like you're setting the 3-axis up to win. You're taking all the cool stuff away from the 5-axis. I don't know how the
yeah,
5-axis can compete.
there's going to be a lot of machine tool sales guys that are going to
They're
have
gonna
they're,
crucify you. They're
they're
gonna be
going to
like,
have a
"What are you
bad weekend
doing?"
after this. I know.
No kidding. No, it's a good point. I mean, you add too many variables, and then how can you really do a true comparison? So
Exactly. Now,
it makes sense.
I think, one of the things, and going back to the independent factor of the study, right? This is obviously, I wasn't tasked with making this case study so somebody can sell a machine tool, right? So for me, it's purely just interest. Hey, which one is more profitable? Which one is more cost effective? Because I always wanted to know. So that's kind of where the independent part of the case study comes in. And I think as there's more independent case studies, I'm sure you can certainly start to get a general idea of what makes sense and what does not make sense financially, right?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we'll have to do a lot of data mining, and that's gonna require a lot of additional free time. So you're gonna have a talk with my boss about that.
And may I remind everybody on this call, we make just as good a 3-axis machine control as we do a 5.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't hurt us either way. You can buy a 3 or a 5. We'd prefer you buy it with a cinemeric, but
Right.
that's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
All right,
So
good.
one of the things you notice here, and it's difficult to see on this side, but you can see it on this side. So if you take a look at the coloring here, you're going to notice that there are a few minor differences. For example, one of the things that I did here is I had to, in a planar wall milling type fashion, walk around the part because I want to make sure that next time when I'm holding this part in the next device setup, I have a realistic setup and an accurate setup.
Right.
So
Square it up, data mit, yeah, all the
exactly.
stuff we would normally have to do,
Yep.
for sure.
But here we go. We're looking right at 8 minutes, 47.917 seconds. And again, this is based purely on toolpath. So doesn't have anything to do with post-processing or anything else like that. So now that we have seen this in action, let's go back to our presentation. Let's take a look at the results, right? If I can find it. Okay.
The anticipation's killing me.
Yeah. Oh. All right. Did I skip this part?
You skipped it, but
I think I skipped it.
same kind of point. So just
exactly. It's worth
consistent.
right. It's certainly worth noting that instead of a wrap device here, we have a curt vise. We're going to have a couple of soft jaws. They're going to be custom. They're going to have custom features milled depending on what the part looks like. These soft jaws are typically made out of aluminum, which is typically something that's laid around. So again, we're not really factoring that in. The one thing that is worth mentioning, due to the nature of the design of the part, there are two chamfered faces underneath that would require a chamfering mill and a 3-axis or 2 additional work holding solutions. So either one, but that wasn't worth noting anyway. So let's take a look at the results here. And you can see certainly our quoting worksheet is growing, right? So now instead of having just operation 1 and 2, we have operation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, right? Because we have 6 studs. So certainly you'll notice the worksheet is a little bit larger, but let's zoom in here and kind of take a look at the interesting numbers. And here what we see is for a part quantity of 50 units, fixture quantity of 1, we have the same cost per part, so $3.25. We do have a difference right here in the burden rate. Remember that the 3-axis facility is going to have a lower burden rate than the 5-axis facility. So if we calculate out the burden rate per minute, we come down to 2 minutes versus 2 minutes and 33 seconds. So the material cost is going to be the same. Here's the cycle time, taken exactly from directly from our simulation. Here's again, we're programming one side, so here's our 50 minutes for the programming time. We didn't factor in the hard jaws with the parallels that was existing. Mounting device, building tools, setting offsets, there is our 30-minute setup time. Is pretty much, I believe that was identical. And part loading time is 2 minutes, right? So that's how we come up to our total cost, with our total cost of $39.98.50, bringing us to a price per part of $79.97. So now, I don't know, Chris, I'm not sure about you. I happen to not have fantastic number retention abilities.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm
So
like, I'm scratching my head going, what was the last number?
yeah, so when I created the slide deck, I kind of said to myself, okay, well, this is going to be embarrassing because I will butcher it. Let me at least plop it up here. So let's take a look and
Very
we can
good.
compare them side by side. All right. Oh, here we go. So
Perfect.
here's our side by side comparison. Now we have a single clamping operation on the 3-axis and the 5-axis. And here, as a matter of fact, look at this, Chris, right? We have a price per part at a run of 50 units of $79.97 per part on the 3-axis, and it's actually $68.63 on the 5-axis.
Wow. So we're saying that a machine that's over twice the price,
Correct.
that's going to cost me another $6 an hour more for my worker to be in front of my operator.
Mm-hmm.
I can still produce it in a 50-piece run at over $10 a part less, actually $11 per part less.
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
So that's interesting. I would not have expected that, obviously. What would you say, what is like the number one largest factor then that's causing this? Because we didn't take into account tool change time and there's no performance gain on the 5-axis. So where's the cost burden that's driving the 3-axis price up?
So as a matter of fact, if you think about it, right, every single time you have to, not you, let me backtrack. Every single time an operation stops and you have an operator that has to physically open the doors, take out, right? We're talking about labor hours here. Take out the part, um, take out um, take out the jaws or the vise even, replace the fixturing, dial it in again, make sure it's all square and true and flat, put the part back in and restart that process. It adds up quickly over time. And I think that's the biggest thing that even I wasn't anticipating. I mean,
Hmm.
certainly one of the biggest costs here is the man hours.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at your numbers before, it wasn't even like you put large numbers there. I mean, 2 minutes per part loading, that's pretty average stuff.
Right? Yeah, I think all the numbers that we use here in this case study are pretty reasonable.
Yeah, certainly conservative, yeah.
Certainly on the conservative side, absolutely. So it stands to reason that this is definitely something that people need to think about, right?
Huh.
And this can be a very convincing argument, I would say. But I do want to point out something that's really important here. Now, don't interpret this in a way where you're not profitable if you were to produce this part on a 3-axis in this manner, right? So
Sure.
if we go back and think about how we defined the burden rate initially to be used during this case study, we actually define it as the internal cost to produce the part plus profit, right? So the price per part we calculated in this worksheet here is your internal cost to produce a part using a consistent profitability factor between 3-axis and 5-axis. So that being said, if the shop decides to make this on go the 3-axis route, they will make an equal amount of profit on this on the 3-axis as they would on the 5-axis. Now that's not to say that if Jeff decides to go with a 5-axis operation, knowing what he knows about the costs associated and the internal price per part for a 3-axis facility, it's not to say that Jeff couldn't say, hey, you know what? I can make this part for $68.63 with enough profit, but I know that Steve down the street can't make it for any less than $79.97. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually sell this part to my customer at $79 even and make even more profit. And I know for a fact Steve down the street won't be able to touch my price. Right?
Exactly. No, I follow you exactly. So here you can either pass the savings to the customer if it's
Mhm.
going to help you win the job, or you can drive up your profitability and still sell the piece for the same price you would have if you methodized on a 3-axis. If you could get the job for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. But
Absolutely.
but certainly if I was the guy with that 3-axis machine, knowing this now, I would be concerned if I'm quoting up against a shop that has a 5-axis and knows how to use it.
Right. So let me ask you this, Chris, right? knowing what you do and knowing the amount of time you spend in this industry, if you were the guy with the 3 axis, what would you do? Would you go out and say, you know what, I'm just going to make sure I buy the same machine Jeff has?
No, no. I mean, honestly, me, if this scenario was occurring, first thing I would do is take advantage of the one thing I know the 5-axis can't do, and
Which
that's I'm going to utilize my available travel on my machine. So I'd add more vices.
good point. Absolutely, very good point. So one of the things that I did mention a few times, this 3-axis vertical milling machine. Um, Again, my number of retention isn't the greatest, but I do know it's a 40 by 20 table, right? So it's 40
Right.
inches wide by 20 inches deep. And knowing the size of a Kurt Weiss, well, guess what? We can definitely put more than one in there. So we actually ended up kind of sort of breaking one of our own rules here. And we decided to just venture out a little bit. So let's take a look what it would look like if we had a multi-fixture setup on the 3-axis. So again, even though we stated we would only compare apples to apples or single fixture to single fixture, I think you could very feasibly make the claim that there is much more real estate to be utilized on a 3-axis vertical milling machine. I mean, after all, 40 by 20 inches is that's a lot of space.
Absolutely.
So our 5-axis machine, on the other hand, only has one spindle and only one rotary C-axis, right? So we're really kind of confined, but let's just consider this a little bonus add-on investigation and a slight tangent, but still relevant for discussion purposes nonetheless. Because again, if you, Chris, were to try to make sure that you can really hammer out as much profit as possible and remain competitive in the market, this is probably something you would consider doing. So let's take a quick look and analyze these numbers. Obviously, that's a big, let me see, I do believe, I did do a little zoom in here. So if we take a look at the numbers that we really care about here, what is the number one thing, Chris, do you think, that really makes a difference if you have multiple fixtures on one table setup?
Well, I mean, certainly the runtime of the machine, right?
Absolutely, right? So one of the things that you can certainly do is you can certainly optimize the tool change time. If you think about it,
Exactly.
the 5-axis is doing something very similar, right? With the 5-axis, I take my 1-inch cutter, my 1-inch end mill, and I face and finish the top of the part. Then I do an A90 rotation, and I basically maximize or minimize my tool change time. So what we're saying here is now we actually said, okay, well, based on having 3 fixtures set up on one table, we can probably reasonably estimate a tool change time savings of 10 seconds per part. Okay. And actually here you can, so what you see that is that we end up with a final price per part of $80.73, right?
So it's costing me more, if I remember, to produce the 50 parts with 3 vices than with one.
Mm-hmm.
How do you
Interesting.
get how do you get there? That doesn't sound right. Does that work?
So so at first we thought, hey, this doesn't work. We fat fingered something. I don't know if this was first thing Monday morning or Friday evening last week. I don't know, but we took a look at the numbers again and again, and it, as a matter of fact, does work. So keep in mind what I said before about the biggest cost in man hours, right? So let's do this. Let's compare the multi-clamping scenario to the single clamping scenario, right? So let's check this out here. So it's hard to believe, but I had to do a side-by-side comparison again because I forgot those numbers already. It's really close, but at a part quantity of 50 units, the single fixture operation actually has a lower price per part than the multi-fixture operation, right? And what we found here is the biggest difference and differentiator here is the labor cost. Now, if you just take a look at this, and I only pulled out operation 1 for presentation purposes here. But if we take a look at our setup time, right? So our setup time with our single clamping scenario is set at 30 minutes. Now, we made, I think, a somewhat realistic assessment and decided that our setup time should really be 60 minutes for the 3 vices, right?
I mean, it stands to reason if it took me 30 minutes to mount, square up, mount jaws, set a 0, it's 3 times the work. I mean, for sure. I mean, maybe somebody could shave a little bit of time out with some tricks, but at the end of the day, yeah, that's a reasonable assumption.
Yeah. Now keep in mind, I mean, if it also depends, right? If you're using the same program with different offsets, I mean, everything has to be square, everything has to be true and flat. Or if you're only using one work offset, then everything has to be true and flat to the first fixture, right? So it gets pretty complicated very quickly.
That's true.
Yeah. So again, initially this was really hard to believe, but it does work out. So I think at this point we want to kind of take a look at, you know, what is Jeff's option here, right? Should he go with a 3-axis single, a 3-axis multi, or should he, you know, take the leap and go with the 5-axis and get up to speed in 2020? So here's a brief, just a really quick review of the single clamping 3-axis and 5-axis operations and the 3-axis multi-clamping. So as you can tell by the numbers, and if you're used to looking at numbers, you'll probably see it right away. If you're like me, then you'd rather just have a graph, which I will provide in a second. But if we take a closer look at all 3 operations analyzed in this case study, it's really easy to see actually that the 5-axis operation with a single fixture allows for a much lower cost per part, more or less from the very beginning. I mean, you know, one of the things that I want to point out here too is we started with I actually ended up changing this to a starting quantity of 3, because if you have one of the scenarios and you want to keep it consistent throughout, and one of the scenarios has 3 fixtures, it only stands to reason you'd want to start with a base of 3, right? So at 3 units, the 5-axis is going to cost you $331.83 per part, right? The 3-axis single clamping is actually really close. You're not off by that much, but keep in mind, you're only talking about 3 units. Right. Even a small job shop, I would assume, that does research and development work is probably going to be north of 3 units.
But even the 3 units you're saying that even in 3 units, so a super small quantity, the 5-axis is still more cost effective. Right.
Now it is more cost effective, but we don't want to lose sight of the big picture here, right? The big picture is that you do have to have the work to be able to pay for the machine, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, for sure. Right. But that's the only reason why your buddy Jeff is out there having machines quoted to him, is because he's got some new work, right?
Exactly right. Exactly. So
hence why I don't have a 5-axis machine in my garage.
Well, you need this quotation.
Yeah, I need this quotation. That's right.
So upon closer inspection, I had briefly omitted this, but we actually found out that pretty much at 57, an order quantity of 57 units, that's where now the 3-axis multi-clamping becomes more cost-effective than the 3-axis single clamping, which, if you think about it, is pretty significant. 57 units is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a decent production.
It's a decent amount. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So that's my crossover where my multiple vices will be more beneficial or cost effective than a single vice on the 3-axis. Yeah. But looking at your numbers, it doesn't look like it looks like the 5-axis wins even up to 3,072 units.
Yeah. Huh. So you know,
that's interesting.
Let's put it this way. I didn't stop with the numbers there because I did want to see what happens if we keep pushing this out and keep pushing it out. So here's a graph that I think does a really nice job of explaining it. So the blue line here represents the 5-axis single clamping scenario. The orange line is a 3-axis single clamping scenario, and the heavy or darker orange is a 3-axis multi-clamping. So what we have here is we have our number of production units on the bottom on our x-axis, and on our y-axis we have the cost per produced part. So that's, you know, hence this curve here. As the volume of our quantity, the volume increases, our cost per part drops, right? One thing to mention here is that the lower your cost per part is, actually the higher your profits end up being, right? So it's this is definitely something to keep in mind, you know, next time you're quoting a job. So in conclusion, we can really deduct from this graph that the single biggest cost factor is man hours while the machine is idling. So we can see here on this graph that the 5-axis operation continues to just outperform the other 2 3-axis scenarios, even as the number of units steadily increases. Now, one other thing here to mention is that, if we can figure out how to reduce the number of hours that someone has to attend the machine, I think even Jeff could justify it to spend more than twice the amount of money on new capital equipment. And again, just to reiterate here, we're talking about a piece of machine that's $125,000 versus a piece of machinery that's $260,000. I mean, we're talking over north of a $250,000 here. And so certainly Jeff would be able to use this to justify it, while comparatively still having the ability to not only be profitable, period, but also to severely undercut a competitor with a 3-axis operation. It's that old saying, if my spindle is running, I'm making money.
Wow. Well, that's pretty cool.
So now that was the conclusion of the case study. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I was certainly surprised by it. I also have 2 @ in my email address. It's because I'm a very fancy person.
Oops.
It takes a while to get to this level, but I've gotten there.
It's because you're from Boston.
That's from my,
You're
basically.
special.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that being said, thank you, Lars. That was quite enlightening. Certainly a little unexpected, but yeah, I mean, I think you went down the right road. You got to take out as many variables as possible. Let's strictly just compare the basics of the technology, and I think you've shown it. Yeah, to your point, and obviously Lars and I are having fun with this topic, and we're got a little back and forth banter, and the 2 of us worked on this content quite a bit, and we did not expect the numbers to fall the way we did. Certainly we expected the 5-axis to at some point outperform. I would have never expected it would have outperformed in low volume work, especially.
Right.
And I was also really surprised about the whole 3-axis or the 3 clamping scenario.
Yeah.
I figured that was going to really stretch its legs. But if you really think about it, what is your real savings? And it's literally just tool change time.
Absolutely.
And you're adding a lot more labor. Now, granted, we could play the game of, oh well, I can mount devices quicker because I have a common MAR between them, and it's not going to take me truly 3 times. Yeah, you can always fool that. But you're right. The big takeaway here is if we can reduce man hours of downtime, and here we're doing it with 5-axis, maybe there's other ways to do it, but that's going to drive your biggest cost savings.
Absolutely.
No, very cool. So with that being said, certainly we want to open up the floor to any questions you guys might have, certainly on this topic, or if there's just general questions, maybe we can try to answer them here, or we can certainly take them offline. Also, as Lars has so graciously given us his contact information, please bother him. So give him a ring. We do have a few questions I'm going to scroll through now, but guys, use the Q&A or the chat window, whatever you guys have up, to type in. And let me start with this. So, okay, this is a good point. Kind of one of the last things that you had mentioned, or at least we're kind of dancing around. So does the 3-axis multi-clamp ever catch up to the 5-axis based on your data?
That's a good question, because we were wondering the same thing. So I guess we can argue what low volume means, what medium volume, what high volume means, until the sun comes up again. But at the end of the day, I decided, okay, well, for me personally, if I was in this position, I couldn't foresee myself ever having to go beyond 25,000 units. So I tested that out. And even at 25,000 units, I mean, the 5-axis keeps on trucking. It just keeps on
Really?
going.
Huh. All right. So this came from Dan here. He says he's new to Siemens. What is multi-clamp? So multi-clamping, I can take this if you want, Lars.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's just a kind of an industry term for when you have multiple parts being held on a table. So clamp would be referring to your clamping solution. So in this case, how many vices do I have when we refer to multi-clamp? Those of you that are familiar with Siemens, you may also know this term because we do have a feature within the control that's kind of interesting, where you can take a part that you methodized for a single vice or a single clamping, and then tell it, hey, I want to do it on 3 vices, and it'll automatically spit you out a program without you having to redo it. So that's another kind of spin on the term multi-clamp. But yeah, certainly in this case, we're referring to just vices for multi-clamp. Okay, let me scroll through. We did have a little bit of an off-topic question regarding residual material in relation to finish strategies when machining. So regarding that scenario, so residual material detection when you're programming, whether it be through G-code or conversational in our control, right, with our HMI, it has the ability of figuring out where a previous tool could not machine. And then what it'll do is just machine those areas. So where a finish, let's say we're in a pocket, a finish would maybe roll around all the sides of the pocket, machining all 4 sides. The residual function will say, hey, did the previous tool get in all these corners? Oh, it didn't. And you'll just get a toolpath that'll work in the corners. So you can't replace a finished toolpath with residual, but it's certainly great keeping you from throwing a smaller tool in a finish pass and then getting a heavier chip load when it rolls into those corners. So you can make sure you have as consistent a chip load as possible when it finishes. Okay, another question coming in from Mark. Does having the 5-axis machine open the door to Jeff to machine more complex parts? Certainly. Now, I think in this case, working based on the numbers that Lars put together, this is a 3+2 machine, so he's not going to go out and take on any full 5-axis work because that machine was not capable of it. But yeah, there's definitely scenarios, even on a 3+2, if it can't do simultaneous, that it will still lend itself to different work holding solutions. You know, some parts are just trickier to try to fixture on a 3-axis machine. You know, if you think about having that full freedom of flexibility that a 5-axis gives, that's kind of where he can be more cost competitive, even in a machine that's just 3+2, just for that mere ability of being able to manipulate that part spatially, you know, reach under certain areas. You think about, you know, Lars mentioned the chamfers. We didn't get into it, but if I was going to mill those chamfers with something other than a chamfering tool, I'd now have to tip that part up on a 45-degree angle. Well, that gets pretty complicated on a 3-axis mill. Am I going to get my sine plate out? Am I going to machine it in my jaws? The 5-axis, I tip the A, and away we go. So there you go. Great question. So this is from Tim. He's just saying, thank you for hosting the webinar. I'd love to see more technical webinars. Have a great weekend. Awesome. We appreciate the feedback. Here's another one. Have you done any comparisons with robotic loading and unloading? That's a good point, Tim. So we didn't want to bring in any kind of external loading scenarios at this stage, but I think that's probably a good point moving forward. Certainly when we want to explore lights out machining scenarios, you know, that was one of the things you could start to maybe make a case for on the multi-clamp, right? The multi-vices, the cycle time could be longer, so maybe it could run a little longer. In this case, and Lars, you can refresh my memory, what was the cycle time on op1? It was 8 minutes or something for the 3-axis? Nope, did I lose Lars? I think it did. Oh, he said that's correct. He must have audio problems. So if you think about it from that perspective, with that scenario, then I've still only got a total of, you know, it's a half an hour or so of runtime. So that's not going to get me very long for lights out. But yeah, the next step would be maybe bring into some, you know, some automatic loading scenarios. Take a look at where lights out machining can start to certainly benefit. And that can benefit both the 3-axis and the 5 for sure. But if you think about the 5, I'm that much closer to having a finished part when I come back in. So probably that's where we'll even see the 5-axis be a little bit more beneficial. All right, so Lars was just apologizing that his microphone did drop out. Let me see. One question came in, do we factor manual tool change loading? So no, I mean, in this case, he actually had more tools. So somebody caught that. I'm a little surprised that more tools than the tool changer would have fit. we didn't want to take in that variable. So certainly when Lars did all the numbers, he worked it out that whether it was a hand load or an automatic load, exact same tool change time. And again, we didn't even back out the savings of tool change time on the 5-axis. So that would have even, broadened the difference between the two. Oh, no. Another one from David Harris, just thanking us for the demo. Have a safe and great weekend. You too, Dave. Great seeing you. I'm jumping between the chat window and the Q&A. So if I missed anything, certainly reach out to myself or Lars. Hopefully you grab both our contact information. But from there, I just will wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Certainly have a great weekend, great 4th of July coming up. Those of you fathers on the line, happy Father's Day, and stay safe and healthy. And we look forward to seeing everybody on the next one. All right. You guys take it easy. And Lars, I want to thank you. I know you're having mic problems, but thank you for putting this together. You did a great job. Awesome job. All right. Everybody have a great evening. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.